Okay. All right. So I just want to welcome everybody. Welcome to our third forum of the year. It's going to be very interesting. Just to remind people just to put on their microphones just for now. To start with, I'm going to acknowledge country. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians. Wait a second, sorry, it's coming up for me. Custodians of the various lands on which we meet today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. Okay, just a little bit of introductions and housekeeping. We've got quite a few people, different people talking today, so you won't be just hearing my voice and Susie's voice. We've got a few people that are doing different aspects of today's meetings. I just want to introduce you to. We've got 2 of the 3 students that are attending at SCIA today. Just wave your hands, guys. So we've got Ariane and we've got Prasi. Did I get that right?
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. We've also got Anthea and Camila who are going to be talking to us about the housing policy work that we're doing. And we've got Suzie with us as well. She'll be talking about our feedback loops. So she'll be giving you information about what we're working on and how we're going in different areas. And we've also got a special guest today from the Grattan Institute. Her name is Hannah Orban, and she'll be talking to us about their interest in housing as well. Okay, a little bit of housework. So if possible, if you've got questions to ask, please use the hand raise on your screen. And also you can use the chat function as well if you don't want to talk. Also, can we please have one person speaking at a time so everybody can ask questions and hear questions and that. Please turn off your microphones when speaking. I know I've already covered that. And just keep your chat function open. So if you've got any questions later on, I'm going to be asking people who haven't completed the housing survey to go in there and have a go at it if it's okay. And the other thing, once again, the forum is being recorded. If you want to use the captioning function, just go into the area where it's got the 3 dots on the top of your screen, and then you'll be able to see language and speech, and there's a captioning option in there for those people that need that. Okay, let's just go to the next slide. Okay, so the topics we're going to be discussing, like we said, the feedback loop. We've got Hannah, and achieving accessible housing is our presentation from regarding the policy work that we're doing today. Okay.
Well, Dana, just to interrupt, I can see David
Yes.
L has his hand up.
Yes, David. Sorry, you just remind me because I can't always see it at my end.
I will. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, David.
Just want to find out. Good, Anna. Sorry to interrupt. Just want to find out. Somebody said they were from the Manning before.
Oh, yeah, by the Manning River. That was John.
Oh, that's John. Wave your hand, John, so I can see you. Yeah,
John,
that's John.
I live up there, and I'm down at Foster at the moment. I just want him to know that. So we're very close.
Yes, yeah.
You are very close, you two. I'm going to link you at some point together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. I'm going to hand you over to Suzie now, who's going to take you through the work that we're doing.
Unmute. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all today. So I wanted to, because Duncan can't join us, even though we do have 2 other amazing speakers, I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk to you about some of the work that we are doing in advocacy at the moment, in representative advocacy specifically, because that is what we're doing here today. So firstly, we have been interviewing for our advocacy advisory group. As we've talked about in here before, obviously, I don't have disability and nor does Gordana, so it is so important that we have an advisory group that can help us inform the policies and inform the work we're doing, inform our priorities, share lived experience. And then also the other part of the Advocacy Advisory Group, I've just been saying this all day because we've been chatting to people, will be to meet with people locally and form local networks. So exactly like you just said, David, to connect. Isn't it nice to know there's someone just around the corner from you with whom you can share your experiences? So we will be formalizing the Advocacy Advisory Group. We just spoke to the last person about 20 minutes ago. So we'll be formalizing that process over the next week or two so that we can get that group up and running. And if anyone wants to ask any questions about that, feel free. We had 10 people who applied. We have, as luck would have it, 10 people who applied. So 10 roles, 10 people. It was amazing. And we'll be setting it up for the first meeting in August. As far as submissions and campaigns that we've been working on, not quite as busy an update as the last time. I think I've done a lot of submission writing in the last one, but we have contributed to the Aged Care Quality Indicator Program for Home Care Services back on June 10. I didn't put out for any guidance on that. It was a very scripted contribution. There wasn't a lot of free writing work. It was mostly what do you think is important, and I think in that what I did raise was the importance of some of the disability linked conditions, so pressure and making sure that we put disability back on the agenda in aged care as well, seeing as people are forced into aged care. So that is one thing we contributed to. We also provided feedback on to the Departments of Community and Justice on the Disability Advocacy Futures Program framework. What that means is the way we work with you guys. So the reason I'm sharing that today is it's about how Gordana in particular does her work and how she engages you guys, and it affects how we do our work and how we collect the data. So we just put forward the importance of group interactions, which they also agree. We have received funding again for the next year, which is amazing to continue things like this and working with you guys. Gordana and Liala are working with our amazing social work students to develop templates to share these initiatives more broadly in libraries, in community centres. Sometimes we don't reach the people we don't know. So we're working on promoting our events a little bit more widely. And we contribute on a monthly basis as well to the Independent Advisory Council on the NDIS. So last April, the last time we contributed, we talked about the lack of funding for emergency preparedness for individuals with complex disability. And Gordana will be in the future talking to our individual advocacy team so that we can learn what the common experiences are there. So that's what we've been doing since we last met, and just a little bit of an update on the submissions. I guess the other thing I've said this, oh, sorry, David, you've got your hand up.
No, don't.
Oh, you just didn't put it down maybe. Okay, no worries. The
just
other
click
thing.
on it. Just click on it again, David. Click on the icon.
The other thing that we are working on is creating activated networks. So some of you will have seen in Gordana's communications that we're asking people to nominate for anything they're interested in. So again, we'll go through the priority areas, and aligning to all those priority areas, we're getting little communities of practice. I just emailed some of you yesterday, I think, or the day before, about the Achieving Equity for People Over 65 group. And we've got 10 people in there. And we're going to connect everyone so that people can start talking about how we're going to advocate in that area. So I'm going to show you a diagram. I want to do a recorded recognition of the amazing work that Gordana is doing as well. She's done such a great job connecting everyone. I'm sure you guys agree. And Gordana and Liala did a wonderful job of representing visually all the words I'd been throwing at them. And this is that diagram. So what we're trying to do is talk about how advocacy will work together at SCIA. So obviously you guys know there's the 3 different types of advocacy. We've got individual advocacy, which our individual advocacy team do on a regular basis, working with individuals on specific issues. We've got systemic advocacy, which is contributing to submissions and papers. That's a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment, that Tony used to do, attending forums and network meetings, making sure we're across what's happening, and writing letters and contacting decision makers. And then we've got the stuff you guys are involved in, the representative advocacy. And that's what we're really focusing on growing a little bit at the moment. We're looking at setting up these the advisory committee so we can better listen to our community, getting the you guys in the people in the advisory committee to listen to their community, and encouraging our members to speak up and be involved. So that's all of you guys, and contribute to systemic advocacy, which is kind of what we're doing today. So Camila and Anthea, who'll be talking to you about the housing policy brief, they are writing a policy brief so that we can start speaking up on this issue, and we want to hear your thoughts on it so we can inform that policy brief. So I guess I encourage anyone to speak up if this sort of works for them. My main thing is to get all of you guys involved as much as possible. Obviously, I'm sharing my screen so I can't see all your beautiful faces, but the main idea is to get everybody involved and to get everyone contributing. So if anyone has any comments, feel free to share them. And if anyone doesn't, that's okay too. So our advocacy priorities, again, big shout out to Gordana and Liala, because I can't think in diagrams and they have, so that we can visually represent some of this work that we're working on. We have our 6 advocacy priorities. I think I've talked about them before in here, but sorry, I got distracted by the chat. I don't know about why one person can't view the content. I'm sorry, my tech is not great. We've got our advocacy priorities, and I'll read them out for the person who can't see it, which is NDIS, over 60, advocating for equality with people over 65, assistive tech, housing, public transport, and service provision. So 5 of them, the first 5, came from the consultation, big member consultation we did in 2020. And the service provision obviously came from that service provider survey we shared with you last time. So today we'll be talking about the housing policy brief. Once we've got a policy brief and a community activated network, we can look at how we go out and advocate for change. So they're the 2 ingredients, I guess, for getting change. With the other one we're ready to launch is the over 65 years, supporting the over 65s to achieve equal and fair support. So those 2 are ready. They'll go to the board in a couple of weeks, and then we'll be able to share them back out with you, form these groups, and start going out to local members and sharing with people, sharing our concerns or our issues with people. Does anyone have any questions?
No, it's looking good. Keep going.
Yep, it's good. I'm glad to at least get that feedback. Thank you. A little bit of encouragement. All right. So as you can see, I always do get a bit over enthusiastic, but I'm really excited about how we are getting this out so that you guys can do some of the advocacy as well. Not just because I'm lazy, but because I think getting everyone to do the advocacy is really important. So if no one has any questions, what I will do is introduce Hannah. Hannah is the associate for the disability program at the Grattan Institute. Gordana and I met with the Grattan Institute, what was it, about 8 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, just to share our visions about housing, because obviously we're all interested in housing. It's a really big issue. We've actually taken, as you'll see with the 2 presentations, slightly different views about how we talk about housing. But I think it's really exciting to have Hannah here talking about what the Grattan Institute's doing. I know I'm a fan of the work that they do, so it's really nice to hear what you're doing, and then also to have you hearing some of our member issues as well. So thank you so much, Hannah, for coming along. I'm going to, what we hadn't done, as I hadn't asked you, are you bringing your own presentation or are you just speaking? You are? Okay, I will stop sharing.
I've got some slides, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll try and get this to work.
I'll get you to, you can share your screen now, I think.
Let me get this set up and let me know if you can see my slide.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone, and to Suzie and Gordana in particular for inviting me to speak to you all today. So as Suzie said, my name is Hannah Orban, and I'm an associate with the Disability Program at Grattan Institute. And at the moment, we're researching housing and living supports for NDIS participants. So Suzie invited me to speak to you all today about that work, and I know it sort of dovetails nicely with some of the policy priorities that you guys are focusing on in housing and in your advocacy. So yeah, I hope this will be informative. Okay, so the disability program at Grattan, we started Grattan Institute in 2008, but the disability program only started in September last year. So we're still pretty fresh, coming up onto a year soon. Our team is Sam Bennett, our director, who formerly was the research and policy manager in the National Disability Insurance Agency. Alistair McEwen is our senior fellow, and you might know Al because he was a commissioner in the Disability Royal Commission and formerly the Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. So he is a wonderful colleague and a huge asset to our team. And then there's me, and I'm an associate, which really means researcher with the team. So our aim is to bring independent, evidence-based research with an economic policy focus to the problems that people with disability are facing in Australia. And that including and consulting people with disability and that work. So I'm very keen to hear from you all today about any thoughts you have about the research that we're doing or any of your own perspectives on housing and living in the NDIS. We also place a big emphasis on using data to understand issues and to design solutions. So that's really important to our approach. So we feel that the disability program at Grattan is filling a really important gap in the policy ecosystem right now. So we have a wonderful sector of advocates, but there aren't many think tanks engaging with policy research. And that's even though there are 5.5 million Australians with disability. If you haven't seen it, this is a bit of a data nerd moment, but the ABS released their survey on disability, ageing and carers for the first time in 6 years last week. So if you want to go and have a look at the ABS website, the 2022 data is up. It's very exciting for me. And the number was 4.4 million. It's now 5.5 million Australians with disability. So very interesting to see that research finally being updated, and we're very thankful to the ABS. So the NDIS, you know, as the major piece of federal policy right now, is a very ambitious project, and yet it needs a lot of work. It's not even close to being fully cooked. And along with the Disability Royal Commission, the government has a lot on its plate in terms of disability policy, and there's a growing emphasis on disability policy in the federal policy agenda. And we also know that the private sector is not going to fill the policy research gap. So we're very excited to be doing this work. Okay, so our research into housing and living supports for NDIS participants. As Suzie said, this is probably a little bit different to some of the work that you will be doing in your advocacy efforts, which I know are more focused on state policy. So hopefully this will give some context to the federal perspective and to some of the work that we're doing which is, really all part of a bigger effort to reach a more equal Australia. Okay, so our policy research question is, how can disabled Australians with intensive needs have high quality, safe and cost-effective housing and living support? The more people we've told that we're working on this, the more people have said, that's fantastic, it's so good you're working on it. And the more we've realized that it's a really tricky problem and it's a big project to bite off as our first, but we think it's really important because it's people's homes and people's lives. So our approach is to promote policy options that are innovative, that are efficient, policy options that have an evidence base and create genuine choice for people with disability. Right now, if your only option is a group home, that's not really having choice. So we want people to have genuine choice. And our goal is for people with disability to live safely in a home of their choice with the supports you need, the supports you choose, and in a way that's sustainable. So why are we interested in this particular niche area of the NDIS? Well, the NDIS is already a huge budget item for the government, and more it's becoming a headache for them. And increasingly, you probably notice there are a lot of negative headlines. More and more this year, I've noticed over the last 6 months, headlines becoming more negative about the NDIS. So it's a big focus. SIL costs are increasing. Supported independent living is getting more expensive. The average plan is just over $400,000 per person now. And as you know, this is only one of the ways that people fund living supports in the NDIS. There's also independent living options or ILO, and then flexible core as well. So even with all this spending, the outcomes are not very good. Current arrangements aren't very safe or sustainable. We know from the own motion inquiry from the Quality and Safeguards Commission that there are high rates of reportable incidents in group home settings. Growth rates are consistently off the 8% target that Federal Treasury set for the NDIS. SIL costs could keep increasing as more people enter this scheme and as the cost of wages for support workers goes up. And more independence, it doesn't have to, but it can be more expensive if people want to live in sole occupancy dwellings and receive 24/7 one-to-one support. That can add up really fast. And also reform is hard. Everyone's housing and living support needs are really different. The Royal Commission called for changes, but it didn't really offer any solutions on how to do that. And the review focused on shared 24/7 support at a 1-to-3 ratio, which is really unpopular, understandably. So we have this enormous policy problem. We kind of have maximum inefficiency here because costs are really high and yet outcomes aren't very good. But we have a window where we can influence policymakers and government. So the government is focused on the NDIS and the DRC because that really brought housing reform onto the agenda. The NDIS is a really big budget concern. And so any opportunity the government can find to save money without compromising on quality would be a really big win for government. So that leads us to the big question of what's the solution? So we love to think about policy problems at Grattan, but our purpose is actually to find solutions to these problems. So some of our recommendations for our research, which we hope to be publishing in the next 2 to 3 months, is to help reform housing and living supports by creating more options for people. So we want to open up more flexible options for people's living and housing supports, and we're taking models from Western Australia and the UK, such as host family models, home share models, and helping government to understand how they can implement these across Australia. We want to do this in a way that's voluntary. People can opt into these options if they want them, but they definitely don't have to take them up if they don't want to. So first of all, creating options in housing and living for people with disability through host family and home share arrangements. Creating a new category of support called semi-formal support that enables more individualised living arrangements within current 24/7 living budgets. So that would be like equivalent to a SIL budget. And reforming group homes so that people with disability who want to live together are not living in many institutions and living at the convenience of the provider, but are in resident-led share houses. We're also recommending systemic changes that will make it possible for people to take up more innovative options. So a specialised navigation and coordination function to help people explore options, because it's good to try things out. It's important to gather information and figure out what your options are and what you'd like to do, have a think about that separate to the budget process. And also creating an innovation fund to trial models. And then another sort of slightly data nerd one is getting better data so we can actually track what's happening. Suzie, I think you have your hand up. Sorry, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just while we're still on this slide, if I'm wondering, other people might be too, can you describe host family and home share arrangements?
Sure, yeah.
Thank
so
you.
My next slide
Okay.
has a little bit more about this. So I'll start off with the category of semi-formal support and what we mean by that. So what we're sort of thinking about is formal, semi-formal and informal support. So formal support is what you typically think of as NDIS support. That's a rostered, paid by the hour support worker. Informal support is, family and friends, community support. And then semi-formal support is kind of the innovation of these Western Australian and UK models. So an example is a host family, and that's where a person with disability would go and live with a host family of their choosing. So none of this is forced, right? You meet with the family, you decide if you want to live with them. Maybe it's a couple, maybe it's an individual. Family is a pretty broad term here, right? And essentially, there's a whole lot of in-kind support that you receive from being part of a household. So that can include, depending on your needs, right? It can include meal preparation, domestic assistance, laundry, cleaning, maintaining the garden, things like that. Being there overnight in case you need support during the night, as well as companionship. And so the point of it is that it's living in the community, and rather than living in a segregated or institutional-like setting. Host families are reimbursed for this. They're not paid by the hour like a support worker. So who it works for, our view is that it would work for anyone. If you find the right host, you can make this work. It's possible that if you needed lots of really specialized support, if you needed assistance with breathing or with peg feeding, things like that, you might have to think about whether this is the right option for you. I think it's workable, but you'd have to figure that out. But that's essentially what a host family is. If you wanted to have a look online, the UK Shared Lives Plus have been working on this model for a really long time. And there's also a lot of precedent in Western Australia. They've been really innovative and sort of avant-garde in finding new ways of housing and living support that are alternatives to congregate living, like group homes. So yeah, this is a taste of what we're proposing. This is only a small portion of what we're putting forward, but this is the main idea. So to wrap up, I guess our main focus here is to create options for people, because at the moment it's sort of group homes or nothing. And we want to help people to do that in a way that is sustainable and where they have genuine choice and control over their housing and living supports. So I'll stop there, Suzie, so we can move on. I know we've got a tight agenda, so I'll stop sharing. And I'll just say now, I would love to hear comments, experiences, questions that you have. We're in a point now in our project where we're seeking feedback from people. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
So what proportion of people with disabilities actually are looking for and require housing?
Yeah, great question. So at the moment, there are about 40,000 people in the NDIS who are receiving what they call SIL equivalent funding. So that's 8+ hours of support. And it expands a bit if you kind of increase the or decrease the number of hours. So if you go down to 6+ hours of support per day, obviously that number gets a bit bigger, but we estimate around 40,000. That was the estimate from the NDIS review. And what the review said is that all of those people who need 8+ hours of one-to-one support also should receive housing from the NDIS. So essentially the answer to your question is 40,000. That's a kind of a weird policy feature, but basically that's what they want to do at the moment.
Surely,
obviously that would increase.
Some of them would already have their own homes.
Yeah, some people would, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of folks are aging out of living with parents and family. Some people would own their own home. I think it's a pretty low number. I don't actually know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but yeah, lots of folks would be currently living with family and needing housing and living support. And some people as well would need, depending on their disability, home modifications that are quite extensive and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you. So there's a high number that require special housing to suit their needs.
Yeah. At the moment, there aren't that many people using SDA, specialist disability accommodation, but the review wants people who receive 24/7 living support to also receive housing so that they can close something called SIL homes, which is where people get sort of exploited basically for their SIL packages, and unscrupulous providers congregate people with SIL packages and use that funding to offset other expenses and basically.
And so is that where they are now? Oh, I've lost you.
No, it's not where everyone is. It's hard to estimate how many people would be in that situation. The NDIA does not have great data on where people are living. It only knows where the proportion's quite small, but it doesn't actually know where everyone with self-funding lives, which is one of the reasons we're pushing for more data. They really should know that. So it's quite hard for the agency to track who might be living in a SIL home, but we know that it happens, and it's a potentially exploitative situation.
In my personal experience, I saw quite a young man, like younger than 40, and he had no family, and he had a spinal cord injury, and he had to go and live in a nursing home because no one else could look after him, and it was very unacceptable. Really, it was terrible.
Yeah, we definitely don't want that to happen.
No.
Jerry, you had your hand up, I think. No, I can't see you.
No, that was actually my question. Literally the same thing. I just wanted to know. I'm a bit of a data queen. I like to know figures and numbers, and I've never really thought about how many people are living in that type of housing. So now I know. That was it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think the answer probably is we're not really sure. If you wanted to have a look at that, there were some exposés that the ABC ran earlier this year about it. Trying to think if there are any other resources that would mention it. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. If I do think of anything, I'll pass it on to Suzie. Yeah.
I like to see like innovation. It's sort of like invention being the mother of necessity. When you need things, it's sort of like innovation seems to be the thing. We need more types of housing, and seeing something like that, like host housing, that's really awesome. I watched a model, I think it was yesterday or the day before, on some documentary news program, and they were trying to fill, and it did include disabilities, trying to fill that need in, I think it was Western Sydney, and they had this unit block, and it actually was a charity took this on, and they built this huge housing, but it was all single units, and they're small and sort of skinny, but they met everybody's needs, and it was like everyone's names went into the hat, sort of not all disability led, but it was lovely to see an innovation. And they thought, you think of, you sort of think of all these people at the top and go, oh, no one would ever take that up. But people do want variety. They do want choice, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's part of the reason we see so much inefficiency right now is people can't find a good match. You know, it's the process of finding the right housing and living support for you is a matching process, and it's complex. It's difficult. So the more options we have, the more likely it is that people will find a good match that works well for them.
Yeah.
I think also it's important to say that we're proposing these two models in this report because we've seen them work really well in other jurisdictions, but we are not limiting what we think innovation is to just these two models. We think there should be more innovation. This is really just a start. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Hannah? Does host modelling go the other way as well? So I know one of our members has asked me once about having space in their home, and that would be a support to them. And I'm wondering if that goes that way too.
Yes, it most certainly does. Who owns the home? Sometimes the names change depending on, sometimes people call that home sharer rather than host family. So it gets kind of technical in a weird way quickly. But yes, absolutely, that's doable. And we've seen that in other jurisdictions, and that's part of what we're proposing here. That if a person with disability owns their own home and they want someone to move in with them, that's definitely a possibility as well.
And I'm just thinking that a lot of the people on this call today are people who aren't in the NDIS because of age. And I think that would be also something that would be really relevant. I know that's another part of our advocacy work, but having that available to people who are also supported by My Aged Care.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Suzie. I mean, we've decided to focus on the NDIS cohort in this. We unfortunately, even this report is enormous. We have to be really careful about scoping. But you're absolutely right. It's a big issue for over 65, and the equity in services for over 65s is a huge policy question. And it's in the back of my mind for sure. So maybe that's something we should come back to down the line in our research agenda. But I'll also just put to the crowd, if it's okay, and if it's better to save this for the discussion section, that's fine. But you know, most of my experience in disability is to do with intellectual disability, and obviously people with intellectual disability are a very large proportion of the supported independent living cohort. However, spinal cord injury is, you know, quite a different disability, and the needs of people with spinal cord injury in housing and living supports are going to be really different too. So I'm wondering if there's anything you think that we should be aware of when we're thinking about this from your perspective, just acknowledging that most of my experience is in intellectual disability.
Well, I think the age limit needs to be eliminated entirely. And we should be advocating strongly for that. There's no age limit that would be acceptable. If people have a disability, they have a disability. And why put an age limit on it? It's just absurd, I think.
I think there was also fear around people who are living independently now being forced into those 3-to-1 ratio group models as well. And I think a lot of our people were concerned about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I notice, and I have noticed you, Jerry, but I'll just go to the comment made by Tanya in the chat about 6 of her friends with high support needs living in their own homes. And I think possibly that's quite common in our community because people acquire their disability, they already own or living in their own homes. But that would be a big fear, I imagine, for some of your friends when they saw the review, Tanya, as well.
And just an observation, I think, you know, that difference between people with physical disabilities and others, you know, something that can take the pressure off NDIS costs and that demand for SIL is addressing the broader mainstream housing market. And so that kind of feeds into Can's presentation. But don't lose sight of that as a policy response to ease pressure on the NDIS, particularly for people that can do have high support needs but can live independently. They just need a house that's got a doorway wide enough to get into and a roll-in bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for that, Caitlin. And I think it's important to say as well, I mean, I really focused on living supports here, and that is the major focus of our report. But in terms of housing...
Sorry, it says Caitlin, but I'm actually Anthea.
Oh, sorry, Anthea. Beg your pardon.
Sorry.
In terms of housing, we are trying to recommend ways to move away from SDA as the solution for housing, you know, because if people can rent in the private market, then that's great. You know, that's more options for people. So making sure people can do that as well if they want to is important for us. Yeah.
Jerry.
A little bit sidetracked from where we are now, but going back a little bit, I was just going to ask, I'm a bit oblivious to people who are a lot older and either on the NDIS or just on the verge of coming off. What happens to them if they are, and it's more for my own just needing to know, what happens to them if they're right on that verge and they've got a really good support package with NDIS and they're suddenly, is it like you're off, you're done? What happens? Is there like a build up, a time limit where they're eased over to other forms of, what happens?
Suzie looks like she might have an answer.
I'm like,
to
who
this
should
question?
answer this question? I'm not sure. There's probably a lot of people quite well equipped to answer this question in this call. But you're not talking about housing, are you, Jerry? You're talking about general support.
Yeah, general support, but a little bit housing too. But yeah, mainly general support.
Unless you need aged care, you can keep your NDIS package. But as soon as you touch aged care, you move into the aged care system. So people can stay if they've had their injury before 65. But if you acquire your injury after 65, that's when a lot of the people on this call, and that's their other policy brief, is that a very unfair process where people are not able to access the supports available in the NDIS.
Okay, thank you.
David L.
I was just going to ask Hannah if she could go to that place of finding out about aged care and over 65s. So I know of one case where a person was 64 and 11 months. He became spinal cord injury and he got the NDIS and then turned 65 months later. So grossly unfair. I mean, look, good luck to him. He didn't need his injury. Nearly died. Still, doesn't seem very fair that you can have it one day, and then 2 days later, you can't have it. There's the fairness there.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate you raising this. It's not an area of the NDIS that I've looked at very much so far in my time at Grattan, but it's definitely something that comes up whenever we talk about the NDIS. So yeah, appreciate the perspective, and we'll have to have a closer look at it.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thanks, Suzie. This one's for Hannah. Going through one of the green theorists, which I love to pieces, talks about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And practically what I've seen is, even though some people have that level of shelter, that they have restrictions of food or restrictions of love. So that's one personal experience that I've seen and I was able to observe. But the other one uniquely was they did have food, they did have love, but they were unable to get shelter because of their circumstances with the spinal cords. So whilst they were going through that trauma, which we talk about little t, big T trauma, it was interesting from a social observation that even though some cases have shelter, but then they have the restriction of food and love, and yet other people had the food, had the love, but they didn't have the shelter. and it really did balance their whole experience of what they would triage to be more important. So I guess that's more from a national level as well, that's what I've observed, and it hasn't been isolated in regional and remote areas. It seems like it's just human. It's a human thing. So I thought I'd just add that into your little kind of observations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. That's a really good point, and I think that's one of the reasons we've looked at housing and living supports in this report together, because you really can't separate them. You know, they go together, and you need all of those things. And ideally, they're things that you also get to choose. You know, you get to choose, at least to some extent, you know, where you live within the radius that you want to live, near the people that you want to live with, and in your price bracket, you know, and that you have time to spend with the people that you love, and you get to choose what you eat. You know, they're yeah, it doesn't seem like too much to ask, does it?
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to add Aboriginal people into the mix as well. A lot of them find it really difficult to access the NDIA to start with. A lot of them end up in the aged care sector at a really early age. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at, and I don't think the NDIS is engaging very well with that group of people either.
That's a good call out. Go down, thank you for that. Yeah.
And David L, I think, is next.
Yeah. Sorry about the voice. However, Hannah, totally agree with Chris. Love, food are really important, and shelter. However, I had to go to a nursing home, stay away from my family, so I'm deprived of love. You know, there you go. And that's what I really hate. Can't get hugs, can't do anything. Deprived of love. It's really hard. So I won't grow anymore. Sadly, vegetate. So I mean, I think that's so important, Chris. So thanks for raising that.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's it's a really important point, and I think we are cognizant of the fact that segregation is far too prevalent right now in the way people are living, and so we want there to be more options for people to live with the people that they want to live with. And yeah, I know oftentimes that is family. You know, that's the yeah, people closest to you. So any way we can make that possible, hopefully we can get closer to that with these policies and create more options so people have more flexibility and they're not having to live in you know, congregate settings when they don't want to do that.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I don't think there's any other hands up, but please feel free to jump in if anyone has any questions. I think it's really interesting, you know, listening to what you've been researching, because I think, as Tanya sort of said in the chat, and I've been thinking while listening to this conversation, most of the people we work with, they might have higher care needs, but are still living in their own homes, have had home modifications, acquire their disability, you know, later in their lives or younger in their lives, but still where they're established. So it's interesting for us to think about that. And I think it's something I've heard a lot of people with spinal cord injuries raise a fear of when reading the NDIS review, what that 1:3 ratio actually means, and how that might impact them. So, you know.
Yes, so thank you everyone for having me today. So Anthea and we have been working on a policy brief on accessible housing for New South Wales with some suggestions on some actions that the government could take to improve housing accessibility as soon as possible. So I have to acknowledge that Anthea did the most of the work. She has a wealth of knowledge in the housing area, and I was more like a helper in that process. So most of what I'm presenting is her work today. So as we know, and we've been discussing this afternoon, housing is a human right, And although Australia is a signatory of the United Nations, I'm just see what's happening here. Yeah, so although Australia is a signatory of the United Nations Convention for People with Disabilities, which states that accessible housing is a human right, we haven't been doing very well in that front. So there's a critical shortage of housing with basic accessible features in New South Wales. Even though New South Wales introduced voluntary guidelines for accessibility for builders in 2011, there was no follow-up measures for monitor the uptake or any changes that happened since. So we know that the government, the current New South Wales government, has made a commitment during election and after election in 2023 to increase the levels of accessible housing. But things have moved very slow in that front, and the government continues to opt out of the National Construction Code's the 7 minimum standards of accessibility, which is a disrespect to human rights for the people living with disabilities in New South Wales. So it shouldn't be an option for the government to opt out. And accessibility, by following those construction codes, those 7 minimum accessibility standards, does not create massive trade-offs for housing affordability. A lot of the recommendations, they're actually minimal cost or cost-free. For example, many changes could be made. Many changes are quite simple. For example, by increasing the internal door widths to 820 millimeters. So not all of the needs for accessibility are of high cost. And we know that accessible and affordable housing has the potential to increase people's outcomes in terms of health, social participation, and including mental health and reducing isolation. Previous research shows that people that have access to appropriate housing have better outcomes in the terms of health and mental health. So these are the 7 National Construction Code standards that should be followed to provide accessible housing. So at a minimum, having a step-free entrance, a rowing bathroom, wider doors and hallways, reinforced bathroom walls to allow for installation of rails so people can grab safely, a toilet on the ground floor, a level street entrance, and stairways that are designed to reduce injury. So as I mentioned before, a lot of those options, a lot of those recommendations have very minimal cost or cost way less to be made at the building stage than actually having it done posteriorly as a modification. So accessible housing is not about specialized accommodation needs. It is about achieving a good design so people can access and use their physical environments to its greatest extent to improve independence and participation, without the needs for costly or specialized solutions. So that's why I'm suggesting the universal design to be adopted as an option to improve housing accessibility in New South Wales. It reduces the need for expensive changes in retrofitting to meet the housing needs at different life stages, because all those adaptations are not only going to benefit people with disabilities, but they benefit people that are aging or everyone that has any reduced mobility, even if it's a temporary reduced mobility, such as after a surgery. So universal design can increase economic participation. So if people live in accessible houses, they probably will participate more in work and activities that could generate a financial return. It also overcomes the issue of isolation and loneliness that arise for people with mobility limitations being unable to visit family and friends. So previous data shows that 2/3 of people with low support needs and 80% of people with high support needs report that they cannot visit their family and friends to participate socially, and that can lead to important impacts on mental and physical health. So universal housing design makes homes usable by all people, increasing independence. It creates benefits by increasing social and economic participation, and it's just good design so homes can remain attractive to all buyers. So what are we calling for? So SCIA is calling for New South Wales government action by mainly addressing 2 main points. So adopt the National Construction Code's the 7 minimal accessibility standards for all homes all new homes being built in New South Wales, and including an indicator in the New South Wales Performance and Wellbeing framework, so it can be monitored, it can be measured, the housing accessibility. So the New South Wales Performance and Wellbeing framework, it is a framework that the New South Wales government employs to report on the performance of the services that the government provides and also the quality of life of the New South Wales residents. So we propose that those measures shouldn't be followed up and they shouldn't be monitored properly. Mainly looking at the proportion of homes with basic accessibility features in the mainstream house market. So what is the proposed action plan? So we're proposing that by January 2025, the New South Wales government should adopt the minimal accessibility standards for all new builds. And the government of New South Wales and the government of that is a no-brainer, David.
WA.
You're stating the obvious, right? But it's interesting that the New South Wales government and the WA government are the only states and territories in Australia that haven't adopted these standards. So we need a push from advocacy systems to get those standards achieved at a minimum. But if the government rejects those standards, they should require to at least commit to implement a trial of the minimal standards accessibility in the new builds around the suburbs along the light rail network. And the reason why I'm suggesting the light rail network is because the light rail offers a quite accessible transport option. It's much easier to get in and out, and unlike buses or the rail services. And presently, there are few options, very little options for accessible housing along those routes that would facilitate people's mobility and commuting along those routes.
Cam,
yes?
David L. has his hand up.
Sorry.
So that's okay. David?
Olivia, yeah. Does this also apply to regional areas as well?
Yeah, so the idea is for the government to address across the whole state, but we could suggest that they trial along the light rail network along the Sydney area and then monitor that to later be expanded and scaled up to other areas.
And Cam, if I can just jump in there to help answer
Sure.
that. David, some of those other points that Cam will talk through will have coverage across regional areas, outside that trial. So, developers building on surplus public land, there's surplus public land in regional areas, and also people that are seeking an accelerated building approval pathway. That's happening in regional areas. So there's some capture to be able to extend this into regional areas as well.
Also, just another part of that question is, how do we keep the government honest about doing all this stuff? What are we going to do? Tell the government to do what we need them to do. What you want them to do.
I think the answer to that, David, is just consolidarity with other disability advocacy groups and helping put this on the public agenda so it can be discussed and visible. Better answer to keeping the government honest and accountable. I suggest you'll make $1 million from selling your proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Anthea. And was that Gordana that completed the answer?
No, that was Anthea.
Oh, that was Anthea. Yeah. Thank you, Anthea.
That's good.
So we're also proposing that access to developers, so builders profiting from surplus public land, should be required to give back some level of public benefits by meeting those standards, those minimum standards. We're proposing access to accelerated building approval pathways should only be available to developers who meet those criteria, those accessibility standards. Mm-hmm. We also propose that the New South Wales Government architect should publicly promote universal housing. Was that a question?
No, I think it was just background noise, Cam.
So yeah, we propose that the New South Wales government architect should publicly promote universal housing design in the pattern book, so making it at the forefront of the builders for housing design and in all design competitions hosted. So really valuing the NCC's standards. And also that the statement of priorities for the Landcom board should be updated to include reference to accessible housing and to revise the Landcom's current aim to include a specific target for universal housing. Because currently, Landcom are only required to include a proportion of universal housing in each of their projects, wherever appropriate. So the measurements that we discussed so far, they will be like the main core measures to be taken by the government, but there's some other complementary actions that could get the housing market functioning better and meeting the needs of the population. So, for example, the Department of Planning and Environment should work with the local councils to do a stock take of the number of the new homes with basic accessibility features in each local government area and publicly report this information by local government area, so having more clarity. Including an indicator in the New South Wales Performance and Wellbeing Framework to track the number of homes built with basic accessibility features in the mainstream house market and establish a framework for accessible dwellings. So really monitoring what are the goals, the financial resources, and the accountability mechanisms to enable reporting. So that also adds to the clarity and access to information. The government should also enable access to accelerated building approval pathway only if the developers are compliant with the NCC minimum accessible standards. So this would put incentives in place as the New South Wales government embarks on its accelerated housing mission in the state. We know that there's a big push at the moment to increase housing in general. So it's a great opportunity that all the new builds are accessible.
Just quickly, there's a chat in the chat. David said that the Minns government has released new plans for housing development along train lines. All dwellings will have a minimum walking distance from train stations. Wouldn't it be fantastic if the 7 minimum accessibility standards were included? And Anthea, Chris Brayley would like to meet up with you.
That would be great.
And yes, David, I couldn't agree more. It's a great opportunity. Everything that is newly built should be adhering to those standards to actually make housing accessible to everyone in the community.
I guess that highlights why this work with the SCIA is doing is really timely, because if we miss this opportunity now, while the government is investing in hundreds of thousands of new homes being built, we miss it for generations, because we know that built environment, it lasts for 100 years or more. So if we can't get some action on this with the New South Wales government very quickly, we will miss a huge opportunity for change, and that would be disappointing for us, but also for the next probably 2 generations.
Exactly. Good.
Absolutely. An issue happens right now as we speak, pretty much. So we also calling for action in the real estate industry, the New South Wales real estate industry. So Anthea did a search on Monday, like this week, and only realestate.com has features, realestate.com has features where you can choose for accessibility filters. So she found only 3 houses for rental that had a step-free entrance, wide doorways, and a rolling shower, and that's across Greater Sydney. And only 7 houses for sale in the Greater Sydney with those basic features. And the domain.com website doesn't even have search filters for accessible features in homes that they advertise. So we call for an action that is very cost neutral for the New South Wales real estate industry and leading websites such as realestate.com and Domain, where people could access information on accessible features available for all homes advertised for rent and for sale in New South Wales, So having that very clear and easy to access on the website. And because real estate agents at the moment are not making that information available on accessible features as they're advertising their clients' properties. So better access to information would make it easier for buyers and renters to find homes with basic accessible features, would support the functioning of the property marketing and help incentivize the buildings of homes with basic accessibility features as the real estate market grows. So this is pretty much the content of our policy brief that we would like to get your input and your opinions. So as Chris mentioned at the start, it's not rocket science what we are proposing, but it's something that needs to be done quite quickly. So Suzie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I guess also before you do, or while you're still here, does anyone have any comments or questions? I know something that really stuck with me when I was back in January, when I was new to this space, trying to get my head around the housing issue, when Anthea said, because my advocacy background was in social and affordable housing, and Anthea said to me, well, we should be social, or she might have written it, Anthea, but anyway, social, affordable and universal housing. And so I think that's a really important thing, that we're always referencing the importance of universal housing alongside social and affordable housing. Yeah. And that's really stuck with me, and I think it's really importantly embraced in this policy briefing. So for me, I think it's an awesome document. But I guess, we've just shared we can't launch it until the board's approved it on the 25th of July. But any comments or thoughts? I know we're a bit down on humans. The social media advertisements for this went out 10 o'clock last night, which was a bit late. So apologies that we're a bit down on humans, but we are recording it. It would post it on our resource hub. But does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about what Camila's presented? Jerry? You're muted, Jerry.
Ha! I did it. That's terrible. That's the layman's thing to do, isn't it? Lame. Yeah, the 7 minimum standards, is that, like, I'm not even aware of whether we have any basic standards for actual public building, do we? Like, are they going to be like conglomeratized across public and public housing, or is this just mainly concentrating on public housing? Because like our local area, Ballina Council in our area had an opportunity, and I'm not sure now, it's a little while ago, but they were doing up, I think it's the Sharps Bay area, and they had an opportunity to make it completely disability friendly. There was even, from memory, and I'm only going by memory, so if I get it wrong, forgive me, but they had an opportunity to actually capitalize on it. There was funding for this particular thing, and they opted to just put, and I'm being a little bit probably mean here, but they opted just to put a viewing platform so that we could watch, people in chairs could actually just watch people having fun rather than get down there. Like, I just couldn't see the and actually a doctor here, and I don't remember her name either, forgive me, but it was in our local magazine, and a doctor actually made a big thing about that. They just chose not to even look at that funding that was available for it, and that's really sad. So I just sort of mention that anyway. They have these big disability inclusion plans, but they're not utilizing them, they're not following them properly. And that's really, I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's really frustrating.
It is. Yeah.
The first part of Jerry's question, I think, was does this apply to social housing as well? I don't know, Anthea, if you want to.
I think with social housing, we've spoken to Rose Jackson about this, and her view is that all social housing in New South Wales is required to be accessible. When you look at the Landcom commitment, it's hard to see that it is a commitment to 100%, but I do believe that all social housing built now is to be accessible. Yeah. The thing is, not everybody wants or needs to live in social housing, I guess, and it comes down to that choice. And I think people with mobility limitations have more options to be able to live independently and where they choose outside of social or public housing, and also outside of environments like nursing homes or group homes.
Absolutely. David L., your hand's up.
Suzie, I was wondering whether 25th of July is a long time to wait for the board, isn't it, to ratify this?
It's only about 2.5 or 2 weeks, I think.
Okay. That's good. What worries me about...
I can't not because I've got my hands full. Oh, sorry.
What worries me about social housing
Yeah, it happens a lot, doesn't it, David?
Sorry.
is that it's not as well built. It's not as well built as privately done. Because it's privately done, hands-on, looking at it all the time, give me a check on the builder. Whereas social housing, we just doing it for government. Don't seem to care as much. But it's not done to specifications, as well as could be. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah.
Chris.
Thanks, Suzie. I was just thinking, Camila, when you talk about that 7-point housing strategy, some LACs have actually taken a bit of a pioneer road by actually adopting it to subdivisions that I live in, that I know that they've actually made an effort to do things with the housing standards to make the footpaths accessible, etc. before, so they've taken the lead that way. So I'm not going to pump up their tyres, but yeah, I live in that LAC catchment, so I do know that they have had experience with people with disabilities, and that has been their pioneer role to try to do something because of that experience. But I do also know that in Wollongong, there was a massive housing establishment that actually was going to do that. Have you heard of anything where a conglomerate of housing estates or developments have actually said, we're going to adopt this level automatically? So it comes from the private sector, not the government sector. Have you had experience or knowledge around this?
No, I haven't, but it sounds like good news. Sounds like it's moving in the right direction. Anthea, have you heard anything in that
No,
line?
I haven't, but it would be really good to know more about that, Chris, because one of the reasons that the government gives for not adopting the standards is because of pushback from developers. So if you've got an example of a good cohort of the private sector willingly taking this up and demonstrating that there's not a trade-off with housing affordability, that would be fabulous evidence to bring into this.
Yep, happy to share.
Great, thank you.
Great.
So good, just Gordana. Yeah, last question because we're
actually just adding another chat from Tanya Finch. It would be great if all new houses complied with the Australian standard AS 4299 1995 adaptable housing, and we had 2 people responding yes. Cool.
So Camila and Anthea, thank you so much for preparing the policy brief and the presentation today. I find it very exciting. It's a practical approach to something that has been, really difficult for many, many people who've been members of SCIA for a very long time. Even if you have a house which is completely accessible, allowing you to have all the freedom and benefit to live completely independently or as independently as you can, you still can't always visit your friends. It was the first thing I noticed when I moved into my house, when I was working here, and I looked at my house through fresh eyes and went, well, no one could visit me. And my house is relatively new. So I think it's a really important It's a really important document, not just for people's individual, but for people's social and well-being. So I find it really exciting. I guess it segues nicely. Anthea, did you have, before I start talking, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I didn't, and I'll have to drop off shortly, but just a big thanks to Camila and to yourself, Suzie and Gordana, and very happy and to have further feedback or input from everyone who's with us today. If you've got thoughts afterwards, please just let us know. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you, everyone. So I was just getting the right slide up and got completely distracted. So as we said, we're going to be finalising the housing policy brief and having it approved by the board. And yes, it is the 25th of July, which is when the board next meets. But it's not that far away. Time does fly, unfortunately. And we will also at the same time be putting up the policy brief for achieving equity for people who are over 65. Once we do that, we will have them publicly available on the website. We'll be setting up our communities of practice, encourage people who are interested in this issue. If Anthea and Camila have got you interested, email the representative email address and Gordana will allocate you to the community of practice so we can talk about how we're going to get it known, get it noticed, and who we're going to talk to. There's also, again, big thanks to Anthea for finding this for us. There's the submission to the New South Wales Treasury Have Your Say consultation. We have written a submission. When I say we, I'm using that very generously because Anthea really wrote it and I just put it on our template. So Anthea's been very active in this space, which is amazing. Again, I'm just waiting for some approval for that and we'll be submitting. But you guys can also fill out the survey saying that universal housing is important. So I did the survey. It took under 2 minutes, I think. I have a post to go out on the socials page about it, actually, at least on the Sydney Spinal Socials page. So please find that survey and just put it on the agenda. It's a nice, it's a different department, a nice way to raise that universal housing is really important. And then we will also be reaching out to other organisations. I've already started that process to join us in our calls for action and be putting this up on the resource hub as well. So I don't know if anyone else, I know we've sort of pumped you for your comments and I know we're a little bit smaller a group than normal, so maybe you're done talking, but if you have any other ideas for how you can promote, we've got a minute to jump in, or you can email the representative advocacy email and give those ideas as well.
I was just going to say, I'll send that short survey out through the fellow advocates email. So it'll either go out on Friday or first thing Monday.
Perfect. All right. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Hannah, Anthea, Camila for joining us. Enormous thank you to Gordana as well. I think since she has been doing this, we have got so much engagement. So thank you very much, Gordana. You're doing an amazing job. Just wanted to make sure I said that on the record. We all really appreciate you. And thank you to everyone else for joining us today and anyone watching as well later on. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks
Right,
for
bye
having me.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for attending.
Bye.
Bye.